At 65, Simon Cowell, the man who once controlled the fate of global superstars with a single raised eyebrow, now finds himself at the center of a narrative more heartbreaking than any talent show elimination. Once hailed as the most powerful figure in television, his life has unraveled into a series of painful chapters the public never saw coming. From career-defining scandals to freak accidents that nearly left him paralyzed, the legend behind the sharp suits and sharper tongue has become a symbol of survival, regret, and quiet redemption. His empire, once built on unshakable confidence and razor-sharp judgment, has slowly transformed into a fragile monument of past glories and private battles. The man who shaped culture with ruthless honesty and a zero-tolerance policy for mediocrity is now confronting the most brutal truths of all: aging, mortality, and legacy. This isn't just a fall from grace. It's a portrait of a titan undone by the very forces he once commanded. Behind the judge's desk, he was invincible. But behind closed doors, Simon Cowell was fighting demons the cameras never captured. The silence of a loveless childhood, the crushing weight of scandals that fractured lifelong bonds, the harrowing aftermath of life-threatening injuries, and the irreversible heartbreak of losing someone he considered a son. For decades, he judged others with unapologetic precision. Yet today he stands in judgment of his own life, asking questions only time can answer. What happens when the man who had everything is stripped down to what truly matters? Can fame heal childhood wounds, or does it only mask the pain with applause? Can power protect against tragedy, or does it only make the fall more brutal? The tragedy of Simon Cowell is not that he fell, but that he climbed so high while carrying a weight no one ever saw. And now, as the spotlight dims and the applause fades, the untold story begins. Not of an entertainment mogul, but of a man, learning to live with the echoes of everything he built, lost, and finally, began to understand. Long before the cameras, the controversy, or the crushing weight of global fame, Simon Cowell's world was shaped not by stardom, but by silence, the kind that echoes through childhood bedrooms and buries itself in the psyche of a boy desperate to be seen. Born in 1959 into what appeared to be an elegant London household, Simon's early life looked picture-perfect on the outside, but was emotionally hollow within. His mother, Julie Brett, a poised ballet dancer, was distant and unreachable, gliding through motherhood with the grace of her art, but none of its warmth. His father, Eric Cowell, a music industry executive, measured love through achievement, offering approval only when success could be quantified, never once uttering the words, his son craved most, "I'm proud of you." Instead of affection, Simon was fed cold expectations and suffocating comparisons. At school, he didn't fare any better. At Radlett Preparatory and later Dover College, he was no star pupil. Instead, he was the misfit, the rule breaker, the boy who challenged authority and drifted along the margins while classmates soared. Teachers dismissed him, peers outshined him, and every overlooked report card reinforced a painful truth: he wasn't enough. That lack of validation festered into something deeper than teenage angst. It became an emotional wound that would later drive his relentless pursuit of recognition. Years later, Simon would confess that his father's emotional absence haunted him more than any public failure ever could. The absence of approval didn't just scar him. It hardened him, made him sharp, defensive, determined to prove his worth to a world that seemed blind to his existence. That hunger for acknowledgement became his fuel, the fire behind every scathing critique he would one day deliver on television. He didn't just want fame, he needed it, craved it, because in his mind, only the roar of millions could ever silence the void his childhood left behind. And in that unspoken pain, in those formative years of rejection and invisibility, the legend of Simon Cowell was born, not from privilege or talent alone, but from a boyhood shaped by the desperate need to be seen, heard, and finally, enough. Before Simon Cowell became a household name, before he wielded the power to make or break dreams with a single sentence, he was just another invisible face lost in the underbelly of the music industry. A mailroom assistant at EMI, sorting fanned letters and fetching coffee for the very executives who wouldn't even remember his name. It was a job that reeked of insignificance, far from the dazzling spotlight he once envisioned. For a young man already bruised by a childhood of emotional neglect, this role was more than just a career disappointment. It was a brutal confirmation of his worst fear, that he was destined to be overlooked. The glamour of the music industry didn't reach the basement where he toiled. The only thing that trickled down was indifference. Day after day, he walked the corridors of EMI, unacknowledged by the very people whose approval he once believed could save him. Feeling humiliated and unseen, he quit, only to return months later after finding even greater rejection outside the company. That return wasn't a choice. It was desperation. He would later admit to crying alone in office bathrooms, questioning if his life had already peaked before it had ever truly begun. But buried beneath the shame was a resolve quietly taking shape. In those soul-crushing years, Simon stopped looking for validation and started studying the industry's unwritten rules: who held power, how it was used, and how image could triumph over talent. It was a brutal education, earned not in lecture halls, but in humiliation. And when he finally dared to launch his own label, Fanfare Records, in the 1980s, it wasn't built on idealism. It was built on pure grit. For a brief, glittering moment, Fanfare brought him the validation he'd hungered for. With pop hits like So Macho, he tasted fame, money, and relevance. Parties, celebrities, champagne. Simon finally felt like he belonged. But the industry is cruel to those who aren't built on solid ground. As trends shifted, so did his fortune. Sales collapsed, debts mounted, and Fanfare crumbled into failure. Once again, Simon returned to the one place that had never changed: his parents' home. Back in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by old dreams and fresh shame, he faced a new identity. Not just invisible, but now bankrupt. Friends vanished, creditors hounded him, and the glimmers of success dissolved into silence. He would later say, "That nearly broke me." But what no one realized was that this failure didn't end his story. It rewrote it. Because in those moments of invisibility, Simon Cowell wasn't just mourning a collapse. He was preparing for reinvention. After the collapse of Fanfare Records and the humiliation of returning to his childhood bedroom, most would have disappeared into obscurity. But Simon Cowell didn't just rebuild. He reprogrammed himself. No longer chasing the illusion of critical acclaim or timeless artistry, he re-entered the music industry in the 1990s with a colder, clearer mission: to sell records first and worry about respect later. At BMG, he wasn't the star executive, but a man fueled by desperation and laser-focused on results. Gone was the dreamer who once believed music could speak for itself. In his place stood a strategist who studied charts like war maps and audiences, like markets. While others mocked lowbrow pop and sniffed at mainstream success, Simon went where the money was, and he went all in. He signed acts critics dismissed as disposable: Robson and Jerome, Westlife, novelty covers, repackaged hits. All the things serious executives turned their noses up at. But while purists rolled their eyes, Simon's acts quietly sold millions. His artists didn't need to win awards. They dominated charts and bank accounts. And behind every mocked single was a man learning to master public taste like a puppeteer. Where others saw cheesy ballads, Simon saw emotional resonance. Where labels sought artistic prestige, he chased mass connection. His philosophy was brutally simple: perfection doesn't sell, emotion does. And while others guarded their egos, Simon let go of his and built power in the shadows. He began earning a reputation not as a tastemaker, but as a hitmaker, someone who could turn the most unexpected voices into chart-topping forces. This era wasn't flashy. There were no red carpets or viral fame yet. But within boardrooms and industry circles, Cowell was becoming a quiet force to be reckoned with. The boy once starved of attention was finally learning to control the spotlight, not just bask in it. And that quiet power, built not on applause but calculation, was about to be unleashed on a global scale. Simon Cowell didn't just recover. From failure, he mutated into something stronger, more dangerous, and far more influential. He had learned how to win not through talent alone, but by understanding exactly what millions of ordinary people wanted to hear, and giving it to them, before they even knew they wanted it. His comeback wasn't just personal, it was the blueprint for a media empire. By the early 2000s, Simon Cowell was done with building hits for others in the background. He wanted the world to see the mastermind behind the music. That opportunity came with Pop Idol in the UK, a reality competition that would forever alter the entertainment landscape and elevate Simon from shadow executive to television's most feared judge. Critics sneered at the idea that someone so blunt and emotionally cold could succeed on camera. But that icy detachment, that refusal to sugarcoat failure, became his weapon. Week after week, he sliced through mediocrity with brutal honesty, delivering comments that were equal parts surgical and theatrical. That was absolutely dreadful. Or the now iconic raised eyebrow after a bad performance became national talking points. Audiences didn't just tune in to watch singers, they came to see what Simon would say next. When American Idol launched in 2002, Simon Cowell became a household name virtually overnight. Millions were hypnotized by his unapologetic critiques. And as contestants braced for his verdicts, a cultural shift occurred. Entertainment wasn't just about talent. It was about judgment, spectacle, and the thrill of raw, unfiltered truth. Cowell didn't just sit on a panel, he ruled it. Soon he launched The X Factor, Got Talent, and other franchises under his own umbrella, with formats reaching over 100 countries and drawing in more than 600 million viewers worldwide. His words could make or break lives. He had become the gatekeeper of dreams, and with that power came awe and resentment. Tabloids labeled him cruel. Audiences both cheered and booed, and contestants either feared or idolized him. But as the ratings soared and his empire expanded, no one could deny the impact he was making. For a man who once cried alone in the Shaw EMI mailroom, this was vindication. Yet, with every scathing remark and every rising star, Simon's public persona hardened. The sharp suits, the smug smirk, the cutting commentary, it all became armor. Beneath it, though, was a man growing, lonelier by the season, because while he ruled the airwaves, Simon Cowell was beginning to lose touch with something far more fragile than fame: himself. In 2013, Simon Cowell's perfectly controlled public image shattered in a way no press strategist could contain. The man who had built a media empire on discipline, calculation, and brand awareness suddenly found himself at the center of a tabloid hurricane. Headlines blared the shocking revelation. Simon was expecting a child with Lauren Silverman, the wife of his close friend Andrew. Overnight, the public turned on him. The judge of morality on national television was now being judged himself in the court of global opinion. This wasn't a minor scandal. It was betrayal, heartbreak, and humiliation, all wrapped in the glare of paparazzi flashes. Andrew filed for divorce, social circles collapsed, and even some of Simon's most loyal allies turned their backs. For someone who had meticulously built an image of cool control, this chaos was unbearable. The same media that once elevated him now crucified him. For the first time, Simon wasn't behind the table. He was on trial, and he had no defense. In later interviews, he wouldn't spin it or deflect. He admitted it plainly. It was not something I'm proud of. That raw honesty was rare in an industry of apologies laced with PR tactics. And in the rubble of that scandal, something unexpected emerged. As Lauren's pregnancy progressed, Simon didn't run from the consequences. He embraced them. And when his son, Eric, was born in 2014, the man who had spent his life chasing ratings, fortune, and control suddenly found himself captivated by bedtime stories, toddler tantrums, and the quiet magic of fatherhood. The scandal that nearly destroyed him became the turning point that redefined him. But that transformation came with a price. Friendships remained broken. Trust was hard to earn back. The whispers never fully faded. And yet, amid all the wreckage, Simon Cowell discovered something the entertainment industry could never offer: unconditional love. For the first time, his identity wasn't tied to his empire. It was tied to a tiny voice calling him Dad. Becoming a father didn't just soften Simon Cowell's image, it restructured his soul. Eric Cowell was more than a child. He was a second chance. A do-over for a man who had once equated success with applause and love with achievement. From the moment Eric was born, Simon's priorities pivoted sharply. Late-night production meetings were replaced by school runs, and business flights gave way to Lego towers and bedtime cuddles. The man who once lived for primetime ratings began living for moments no one would ever see. His son's laughter, his questions, his innocence. And for Simon, who had grown up in a home starved of verbal affection, fatherhood was a language he was learning in real time. He began showing up not just as a provider, but as a present, emotionally invested dad, something he had never known himself. He often credited Eric with saving him from a dangerous path, one filled with ego, ambition, and loneliness disguised as power. And yet, even with this redemption arc unfolding, the wounds of the past remained. The scandal that preceded Eric's birth still clung to Simon's public narrative. While some fans applauded his transformation, others never forgot the betrayal. And behind the smiles and father-son photos, there remained a quiet tension of a man who had to rebuild not just a reputation, but his internal compass. Still, in those private, untelevised moments, Simon found the peace he never knew he needed. He wasn't chasing youth anymore. He wasn't clinging to the illusion of perfection. He was learning to be real, flawed, present, and finally human. But life, as it often does, wasn't finished testing him. Because just as Simon Cowell found his footing as a father, fate prepared to knock it out from under him once again, with tragedies that no amount of love or legacy could protect him from. Just as Simon Cowell seemed to find balance between his empire and fatherhood, life struck back with a cruelty that no camera could romanticize. In August 2020, while testing a high-powered electric bike in the courtyard of his Malibu home, one moment of miscalculation hurled him to the ground with devastating force. His back shattered in multiple places. Hours of emergency surgery followed. Steel rods were inserted into his spine. Doctors warned he might never walk again. For a man who thrived on control, the irony was brutal. He, the master of televised dominance, was suddenly dependent on nurses just to lift a glass of water. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the helplessness. And just when he thought the nightmare was over, it happened again. In early 2022, another electric bike crash left him with a broken arm and a bruised, swollen face. Tabloids mocked him. Memes circulated. The invincible judge was now a fragile punchline. But beneath the public ridicule was a far deeper fear: the possibility of leaving his son without a father. It was this vulnerability, more than the physical injury, that shook him. And while Simon had always prided himself on his appearance, the pressure of staying forever youthful under the scrutiny of HD cameras began to exact its toll. Years of Botox, fillers, and cosmetic touch-ups eventually caught up with him. By 2021, his face had transformed into something nearly unrecognizable. Fans were stunned. Headlines asked, What happened to Simon Cowell's face? And the once feared judge became the judged. The man who built an empire by evaluating others was now dissected and ridiculed by the very world he once ruled. Eventually, even Simon admitted, "I went too far." The surgeries weren't just about vanity. They were about identity, fear, and the desperate attempt to hold back time. But time always wins. And in the mirror, Simon saw not a mogul, but a man coming, undone. If the physical pain of his accidents wounded Simon Cowell's body, the loss of Liam Payne broke his heart. In September 2024, news broke that Liam, the former One Direction star Simon had discovered and mentored from the age of 16, had fallen from a hotel balcony in Buenos Aires and died at just 31. The world was stunned, but for Simon, it was a spiritual collapse. This wasn't just another celebrity headline or a tragic footnote in pop culture. Liam was like a son to him. Simon had handpicked him for the X Factor, helped form One Direction, and watched Liam grow from a nervous teenager into a global superstar. His death was more than devastating. It was disorienting. In the days that followed, cities lit up with vigils, fans poured tributes across social media, and One Direction's songs echoed like ghostly hymns. But Simon retreated. Projects were paused, public appearances canceled. He clung to Eric more, tightly than ever, as if holding his own son could somehow preserve the moments Liam would never get to have. Close friends noticed the shift. Simon became quieter, more reflective, less focused on empire and more on legacy. In private, he whispered, "It feels like I lost a part of myself." Liam's death forced Simon to confront life's cruelest truth, that even the brightest stars can vanish without warning. And for a man who built his career on spotting potential, on mapping out futures with precision, the suddenness of Liam's death shattered any illusion of control. The ruthless judge who once dissected dreams with ease now stood paralyzed by the fragility of life itself. And in that stillness, Simon began speaking less about careers and more about meaning. At 65, Simon Cowell is no longer the kingmaker who defined an era of television. He is a man reshaped by pain, loss, and an unexpected kind of redemption. His life, once marked by power suits and primetime verdicts, is now defined by quieter moments and deeper truths. The boy who grew up without affection became the mogul who built an empire, but at a cost that left wounds deeper than wealth could ever heal. Scandals rocked his public image. Accidents nearly left him paralyzed. Deaths stole the people he cherished. And yet through all of it, Simon Cowell found something more valuable than fame: presence. Today, he speaks not of the stars he launched, but of the legacy he'll leave behind for his son. He no longer hides behind cosmetic masks or cutting remarks. He has abandoned the need to appear invincible. He is simply, and finally, human. His story is no longer just about what he built, but what he survived. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not the empire, not the ratings, but the man beneath the suit, scarred and weathered, standing in the quiet aftermath of fame. Because the tragedy of Simon Cowell isn't just in what he lost, but in what it took to finally discover who he really is.